Good morning, everybody. I thought maybe you'd like to see something a little bit different, and I thought the view out my window is awful pretty with the sunrise. I did want to show you something. I hope I don't shake too much, but way out by my wall, I've got some irises. And I have all these pretty white irises. And in the middle of my white irises, I have a deep, deep purple one. Only one. And I'm hoping maybe I can mark it and then separate those bulbs and kind of make it a little more even with all the deep, deep purple. It's a beautiful iris. Excuse me. And that's what I kind of based my painting from this week's art off of, except for I had a picture in front of me. Okay, well, guys, we're on the last chapter of Killer Bear. It's been an exciting book, hasn't it? Actually, we're finishing chapter 9. I'm taking that back. We have chapter 9, chapter 10, and 11. So I don't know if we'll get done with it today. We'll see how we do. Remember, they got in a fight, and then they got stung by bees. One thing I like about going to church in a tent in the summertime, so many people who wouldn't go to church would listen outside, and besides, it was cool in the tent at night. Finally, my parents decided to let me go, but said I'd have to wear dark glasses, which I always like to do anyway. It was great, sitting up there on that platform in the big brown tent with hundreds and hundreds of people out in front of us, and with all the ministers sitting behind the main speaker. There were two choirs, one group of older people and one of boys and girls, called the Booster Chorus, and we were in the Booster Chorus. Little Jim sat on one side of me and Circus on the other. Our Booster Chorus platform was over near the tent's side wall, and I could hear people outside walking around and talking. All at once, I heard a voice I knew. For a moment, I forgot all about the meeting. I was so astonished. Would you believe it? It was the voice of that mean-faced Till boy who smacked me on the side of the nose and had given me my black eye. "Let's go in," I heard him say to somebody. "Nah," another voice said. "People will see us." "Fraidy cat," Tom Till said. "If the gang finds out, they'll make fun of us," the other boy objected. Then Tom Till started quoting a line from one of Poetry's poems. He goes on Sunday to the church. He goes on Sunday to the church, just as Poetry had said that afternoon to the boy he'd licked. "Oh, shut up," the other voice said. I decided maybe he was the one Poetry had licked. I didn't hear anything more for a while, but pretty soon the tent side wall was lifted a little, and two boys in overalls crawled in and sat in the grass behind a big tent pole. One of the boys was red-headed Tom Till, and the other was the boy that Poetry had licked that afternoon. Tom Till had a black eye like mine, and I knew where he'd gotten it. Those two boys listened like everything and didn't act disgusted with the meeting at all. Once, little Jim nudged me to let me know he'd seen the boys too. He asked for my pencil and wrote a little note and slipped it to me, and a note's in little Jim's awkward writing. "I don't hate them anymore. I'm going to pray for them." For a minute, I couldn't see the word because of some crazy tears that got mixed up with my swollen eyes, but I scribbled on the bottom of his note, "Me too," and handed it back to him. He slipped it over to Circus. After all, I decided Jesus had died for all the red-haired, mean-faced boys in the world, hadn't he? I hadn't known Circus could sing, but he actually had a beautiful voice. I decided when I heard it that I was going to tell little Jim's mother, and maybe she'd give him voice lessons free. Or maybe I could even take some money out of my bank and pay for them. I could tell by the way Circus was watching the song leader, who had a cornet, that he was thinking that maybe someday he was going to be a church singer. Wouldn't that be great? Maybe little Jim could be a missionary, and I'd be a Christian doctor who lived in their town and made a lot of money. I'd help pay for the rent on tents and things. Out in the main part of the tent, not far from the front, sat Circus's folks. It felt good to see them there, all in a row, His dad dressed up and his mom looking happy with their new baby in their lap, and 3 kind of ordinary looking girls between them. One of the girls was about my age and had wavy brown hair and a nice face, and I thought that maybe when school started next fall, if a boy stood on his head in front of her, or walked a rail fence without falling off, or killed a spider for her or something like that, maybe she'd smile back at him. All through the sermon, I kept looking down at the Till boy, thinking how maybe if he'd have my parents, he'd been a different boy, and I felt sorry for him. After the meeting, little Jim and I edged over in his direction, but before we could get there, he and the other boy had ducked under the tent and were gone. Chapter 10. Now for the bear story. I guess you know if there is anything a bear likes better than pork, it's honey. It even eats bees. Black bears can climb a tree almost as well as Circus can. Whenever they find a bee tree, they climb right up and take all the honey, if they can. They don't seem to mind getting stung, and they can smell honey a long way off. Baby bears can climb trees too. That is, baby black bears. Grizzly bears can't. The first thing a black mother bear does when there's danger is to make the little bear children climb a tree. Well, the Sugar Creek gang liked honey too, bumblebee honey especially, except that you have to kill all the bumblebees before you rob their nest. I know boys shouldn't kill bumblebees. The red clover that makes such sweet hay for horses and cows and is so good for a farmer's land couldn't be pollinated without the bumblebees going from flower to flower gathering honey and at the same time carrying pollen which sticks to their legs. But we didn't know that at first, and besides, when you get stung by a bumblebee, you can't exactly be expected to like them. And of course, now we know today you don't want to kill the bumblebees. People have ways of extracting honey that doesn't have to kill the bees. Anyway, the next day we decided to go back and rob that bumblebee's nest. We met at the spring right after the noon meal, and we're all there except Poetry and Circus. We knew Circus couldn't come because his mother was sick, and he didn't think he ought to leave home. Big Jim brought along his rifle, and it was leaning against a beech tree in the bark, of which we had all carved our initials. I don't know what there is about a rifle that makes a boy feel like a man when he's carrying one. And boys and girls, you should always take lessons and know how to handle a gun before you carry one. Okay? Plus, you have to be 21 now. Big Jim hardly ever had his rifle when we were together, except in the winter when we sometimes went hunting. But when he did, we all begged to be allowed to carry it because it made us feel so important. We were very, very careful the way we carried it, so there wouldn't be any danger to the rest of the gang. Circus's mother is pretty sick, Big Jim said, and that made us all feel bad. And then he added, "She likes squirrel soup better than anything else, so if you boys see a squirrel, be sure to tell me. My mother will make the soup and take it over to her." Big Jim, you know, lived right across the road from Circus's house. Maybe I ought to tell you that Dragonfly and Little Jim both owned guns that shoot BB shot and aren't as dangerous as real guns. Little Jim could shoot almost as straight as Circus, whose dad had a lot of guns, and Circus could shoot even better than Big Jim. Sometimes Little Jim would shoot Big Jim's rifle, too, when we were shooting at targets. We waited for Poetry, and pretty soon he came along carrying a big brown jug. "What's the jug for?" we asked. He looked mysterious and said, "I'm going to put the bumblebees in it so we can get the honey." "You're crazy," Dragonfly said. But Poetry had a wise look on his face. He went straight to the spring and began filling the jug with water, saying, "The bees are flying and humming. Why are they all coming? Honey to seek, buzz, buzz, buzz." When the jug was half full, he stopped, straightened up, and said, "Now we are ready to go." So we started, all of us keeping our eyes open for squirrels. Pretty soon we were at the little border of bushes that skirts the hill where the strawberries were. "Now you boys wait a minute," Poetry said, "until I get all the bees in the jug." So we waited, still thinking he was rather foolish. He took little Jim's stick in one hand and the jug in the other and crept along like a warrior, getting ready to spring upon an enemy. Once he stopped and turned around and grinned at us, saying, "Anybody that wants to have fried bumblebees for supper, they make the nicest gravy." Then we knew he was crazy. He found the nest and quick as a flash sloshed the jug right down beside it. Then he shoved little Jim's stick into the middle of the nest, gave a twist or two, and came flying down the hill to where we were lying in the bushes. Those bees came swarming out, madder than anything, dozens of them, hundreds of them. And would you believe it? They started going into the mouth of that water jug, just tumbling in like a lot of black and yellow Santa Clauses going down a chimney. Of course, with all the water in there, they got their wings wet and couldn't get out. After a while, when all the bees were in, we walked up and dug out our honey. Yum, yum, was it ever good? We smacked our lips, keeping on the lookout for any stray bees that had been away from home gathering honey. Every now and then one came back, disgusted as anything. But when they came one at a time like that, it was easy for us to kill them with our straw hats. There were a lot of bee cells that had larvae in them, and we had to leave some of the honey that was all mixed up with bees that were in what was called the chrysalis stage. We had learned about that in school. Pretty soon we went swimming again. Then, as we'd done the day before, we started back to get some strawberries, wondering if the Tills would be there again. Suddenly, Dragonfly said, "Psst, there he is," he cried. "The little red one." I looked quick, and so did everyone else, but we didn't see anything. Sometimes Dragonfly was wrong, you know. Anyway, he didn't see him either. "Maybe they're in our strawberry patch," Dragonfly said, looking disappointed that he'd been mistaken. Just to make sure, we sneaked up carefully behind the bushes, and then all of a sudden Dragonfly said, "Psst," again. We saw it all at once. Them, rather, for right there where the bumblebee's nest had been was a big black mother bear and a brown-nosed baby bear. They were eating bee bread and larvae and everything else we'd left. The mother had dried mud all over her sides as though she'd been wallowing in the swamp. It's a bear," Dragonfly whispered. "A sure enough wild bear. You could have knocked me over with a dandelion." Okay, you guys, I ran out of time. Oh, actually, there's only a few more pages. I'm going to keep reading, but if if my recorder stops, then I'll have to start it up again. But I have to download before I start, so it takes a little while. Chapter 11. I couldn't believe it at first, that it was a bear, but I just had to. Just that second, the little brown-nosed cub must have done something his mother didn't like, because she whirled around and whacked him with her powerful forepaw and sent him tumbling over the grass and down the hill toward us. But he shuffled to his feet and went back for more honey. "Let's catch him and take him home for a pet," little Jim said with his eyes wide. I couldn't help but think the same thing. Pretty soon the mother let out a low growl and stood up on her haunches and sniffed the air suspiciously, as though she were saying, "Whoever you are, get out of here. I'm disgusted at you for not leaving more honey." The wind was blowing down the hill, so we knew that they couldn't smell us. Of course, we didn't interfere with their meal, because that's when bears are dangerous, when you interrupt them while they're eating and try to chase them away. Even old Mixie Cat gets cross if she's eating a mouse and you try to get close enough to pet her. She actually scratched me once. Dragonfly suggested looking up at Big Jim's rifle. "How about bear soup? Do you suppose Circus's mother would like that?" Little Jim's forehead puckered as though someone had stuck him with a pin. It actually hurt him to think of that cute little cub being killed. We lay there, keeping as quiet as possible, thinking and watching Jim's big face to see what he was going to do. All of a sudden, I noticed that the little yellow fuzz that had been growing up on his upper lip was gone. That meant he had to shave it off. And I wished I'd hurry up and grow big enough to shave. Jim was almost a man now, I thought. We must have made too much noise, for all at once the mother bear sniffed again. Then she whirled and lumbered off toward the woods, with the baby bear running close to her, like a calf crowding up against a mother cow. That little fellow could hardly keep up, and his awkward little legs looked ridiculous. But they were running straight toward us. You can guess we were plenty scared. We scrambled in all directions and started to run. But when that old bear saw us, she was as surprised as we were. She was running away too, and just happened to be running in our direction, not knowing we were there. When she saw so many of us all at once and heard us screaming, she got all mixed up in her mind and didn't know which way to turn. I don't know how it happened, but Big Jim got in the way somehow, and the little bear ran smack into him and knocked him sprawling. For a minute, he and the cub were rolling over and over in the grass. We decided afterward that if the mother had been alone, she would have run away. But when she saw her baby getting all tangled up with Big Jim, suddenly she went mad. There is a saying about someone being a mother bear, and mother bears are very protective of their children. She thought Big Jim was trying to hurt her little brown-nosed baby. She sent that cub up a tree in a hurry. Then she whirled around fiercely with her big teeth flashing and looking strong enough to crush the bones of a cow. They were a lot bigger than the teeth of the old wolf who had eaten Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother. Her long clawed forepaws looked as if they could knock a boy flatter than a pancake. In the scramble, Big Jim had dropped his rifle. It lay at the foot of the tree, half covered with leaves, and the bear was between us and the gun. Just that second, we heard someone screaming and looked up and saw the little red-haired Till boy up the same tree as the bear cub. Dragonfly had been right after all. Tom Till was holding on for dear life and was crying and scared half to death. The little brown bear was sitting on a limb right below him, and the fierce old mother was at the foot of the tree, acting as if she was going right up after him. I couldn't help but remember last night in the tent and little Jim's note, and all at once I liked Tom Till and didn't want anything to happen to him. Little Jim was closer to the gun than any of the rest of us, and as I told you before, he was very brave even when he was scared. I have told you in another story that he was carrying Big Jim's rifle, but he wasn't actually carrying it until later. That old mother bear was terribly savage. If Tom Till hadn't been up that tree and in danger, I think our gang would have run away, because it's foolish to trifle with a mad bear. But we didn't dare go away, and we didn't dare stay either. We didn't know what to do. It seemed that old bear wasn't mad at us, though, but at Tom Till up the same tree as her baby cub. She whirled around and up onto her haunches and started to climb the tree. It was a red oak, and it was easy to climb. Just then, little Jim darted toward the tree and swooped down on the gun. He had his hands on it when she saw him, and as quick as lightning, she whirled and lunged straight at him. It was terrible. I screamed and grabbed a club and started toward the tree. A club wouldn't hurt the bear any, but it might make her leave. Little Jim and I decided he might make her leave Little Jim, and I decided I'd give my life for him if I had to. In my mind, I could see him being ripped to pieces, and if ever I prayed in my life, I did right then. Little Jim's face was white, but he held onto the gun, and he shoved the barrel forward to protect himself from getting knocked down, kind of like using it for a sword. And when the bear lunged, the muzzle of the gun ran right into her mouth and down her throat. Big Jim and all of us screamed, "Shoot! Shoot!" and little Jim shot. I can hear that bear roaring every time I think of it. I can see her thrashing around with the gun barrel stuck in her throat, and all the time she was dying. It's awful to see a bear die, and I don't like to think about it, but it was a lot easier to see her die than it would have been to see little Jim, or any of the rest of the Sugar Creek gang, or Tom Till. After the bear died, I ran home as quick as I could to get my dad and a camera. Afterwards, when some men came and skinned the bear, excuse me, they found that the bullet had gone right into the bear's neck and broke it. With everybody helping, we caught the brown-nosed cub and